The Bechdel test was created in 1985, so why the heck are we still using it? Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, or welcome if this is your first time viewing it. My name is Mackenzie and today we are discussing the relevance of the Bechdel test. When it comes to analysing art, things are constantly evolving and changing, and as society changes, the art kind of changes to reflect this. So I also think that the ways that we critique art should change with these evolutions as well. So today, my friends, we are looking at one of feminism's, I guess, most popular critiques of the film industry, and that is the Bechdel test. I think when anybody studies feminism in film, one of the first names to come up on your radar is Alison Bechdel. Originally derived from her 1985 comic strip titled The Rule, which sees two women discussing the lack of good representation of female characters in film, the Bechdel test was originally designed as kind of a joke, and honestly more of a comment on the alienation of queer women in cinema. Since its conception, the test has been used to categorise a film's feminist qualities. With many films at the time failing the test, it drew much needed attention to the sexism present within the stories most films were telling. Now, the test, for those who may not be aware, dictates that any film or piece of fiction must have at least two named female characters who talk to each other about something besides a man. These seem like fairly simple requirements, but it often surprises people how many films actually fail the test. BechdelTest.com, and yes, that is a real site, has an extensive list of films and whether or not they pass the test. Everything from new releases to films from 1985 when the test was first published, all the way back to the start of cinema in the 1800s. There's a majority of red crosses to green ticks the further you go into the past, but the closer you get to 2020, the number of green ticks actually increases, which indicates that the Bechdel test was probably instrumental in improving women's representation in film moving into the 21st century. However, the Bechdel test is such a generalised lens through which to view a film through that I wonder if we should really be using it in the modern age of feminism. One of the biggest criticisms of the Bechdel test is that it is reductive and limiting. The criteria with which it uses to mark a film's feminist quality fails to acknowledge the nuances within storytelling. Whilst it can obviously call out a film for using women simply as eye candy or damsels in distress, it cannot dive deep into how well a character was written, or what the context of a conversation is, or even how the characters are framed or costumed. For example, the 2013 film Gravity, which is arguably a brilliant story with a female lead, fails the Bechdel test because the film only has two cast members, the second of which is male. On the flip side, the 2001 film American Pie 2 passes the test because two of its female characters discuss clothes for a bit. Groundbreaking. The test cannot tell you whether a film is good or bad either. There are plenty of quality films out there with all male casts, and just because we need better female representation doesn't mean that these films should disappear off the face of the earth, or be labelled as sexist. This mainly occurs regarding historical films that are recreating a time when women faced far more oppression than they do today, or taking place somewhere where women weren't likely to be seen, such as on the battlefield during war. One of the biggest retorts against feminism is that those who support it hate men. And whilst we all know that's not what feminism is about, the Bechdel test's generalised criteria has actually divided film lovers rather than rallied them to an important cause. Debates turning to the intricacies of what dictates a pass or fail, rather than the feminist qualities of the film itself. On BechdelTest.com, members of the public actually decide if a film passes or not, and that's how it receives its rating. On the 2016 film 10 Cloverfield Lane, directed by Dan Trachtenberg, an example of one of these all-out debates occurred in the comments. Now, I thought it was a good film. There were some good suspense moments. All three of the cast members in the film gave really great performances. Overall, it was an enjoyable experience. There is only one female character, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, but what got the comments riled up, and spoilers for 10 Cloverfield Lane, if you have not seen it, stop now, skip forward, was the scene where there's a woman outside the bunker. User Carlos said, even though the woman the lead speaks to is uncredited, in the film John Goodman's character says her name was Leslie. It would be a shame to dismiss this movie with such a strong and well-constructed female character be dismissed by this tiny fact. This comment highlights for me some of the limitations of the Bechdel Test's rules, which I've discussed in this video thus far. But then user Alexandra disagreed and said, the protagonist is Michelle. The other female character, who is not a photograph, may or may not be called Leslie, and screams at Michelle in the only scene where she appears in the movie. Problem is, what does talk mean? It feels to me that 10 Cloverfield Lane only passes the first Bechdel test because Michelle never talks to Leslie. She talks to Howard about Leslie. Without being able to agree on what a conversation means when it comes to the test, if only a few words are exchanged or, as they say, screamed at each other, how many more films now fail the test with seemingly well-rounded female leads? Then user Sam Berenger had this to add. While Michelle is the film's protagonist, the other woman, Leslie, is barely a character. She exists only to hint at something going on outside and nothing more. What's more, as has been pointed out above, Michelle doesn't actually talk to Leslie during the scene, so it's not really a conversation. I've seen comments about how the film shouldn't be dismissed because Michelle is a strong, capable character. And while she is one of the best parts of the movie, especially since her actress has to hold her own against acting powerhouse John Goodman, and while I really enjoyed this film, I think people miss the point of the Bechdel-Wallace test. It's not meant to judge a single film's feminist values. It's meant to shed light on a larger ongoing problem regarding the representation of women in the media. One film not passing is one thing. The majority of films released in a year not passing is a whole different issue. Which begs the question, what is the Bechdel test even for anymore? I think for a lot of the internet, the Bechdel test has become a way of judging a film's feminist values. Audience members who call themselves feminists may see something like 10 Cloverfield Lane and think it was a great film with a strong female lead, only to find out that it didn't pass the Bechdel test and now feel guilty in some way for liking it. And that's the other thing about the Bechdel test. It turns every film into a statement about sexism. On my blog and on this channel, I talk a lot about women's representation behind the camera and the mountain of work that needs to be done to make sure diverse voices are being heard and seen across the industry. However, I don't think that every film needs to be a political statement. In fact, the increase of seemingly ham-fisted inclusions of social justice within films that really don't need it is negatively impacting people's perceptions of things like feminism and other important rights movements. I think characters in films should just be able to exist, and I think sexism should be included in films where the context calls for it. Looking into past films with our 2023 lens and uncovering all of the problematic elements within is a reductive practice that fails to acknowledge the time the film was made and how much progress society has made since that film's release. I think using the Bechdel test now is equivalently doing the same thing. It's taking a lens from a time where things were honestly worse than they are now, and using it in a way that makes films from the modern age seem worse than they really are. Feminism has evolved quite significantly from the 1980s, as has the representation of women within film. Women are getting much better roles these days, and honestly, we could just look at the Marvel films since Iron Man to see how far women's representation has come. We need to leave dated arguments in the past. I mean, it would be utter negligence to ignore the progress that female characters have made within films since 1985. But whilst there are some gender equality issues that still carry on to this day, the way we talk about those issues has evolved, and I think that's what I'm getting at here. In my opinion, it's more of a ratio issue now. I think we're getting quite a few well-written female characters these days, but we just need more of them across the board. And of course, we can't discount the fact that the ratio for trans and non-binary characters is still pretty low. So yeah, still work to be done for sure. Or you know, there's always this argument. The Bechdel test is feminist propaganda in order to censor pieces of artwork that doesn't feature women as a main role in the movie. If a movie having a role dictating to a specific gender bothers you, you are sexist. When it was first developed, the Bechdel test was a fun tool to bring awareness to an issue present within cinema: the non-realistic, sexist representation of women within films. However, we've seen plenty of progress since then, and whilst it's still not perfect, something as simplistic and generalised as the Bechdel test is really not relevant to analysing modern cinema. There are many organisations that are heavily researching into the representation of women in front and behind the camera, and their reports are super insightful and full of facts that are much better evidence to use when it comes to talking about this issue within the industry. So let's not forget that the test was originally designed as a bit of a joke, and in the spirit of this, I'm going to end off with some passes and fails that made me chuckle.
It's a dinosaur.
Did you know that the very first assembly of photographs to create a motion picture was a 2-second clip of a black man on a horse? And that man is my great-great-grandfather.
Great.
There's another great-grandfather.
Help me! You're killing all of us.
Welcome.
What would you do if there were mice running all around this hotel?
Your superpowers again?
I'm rich.
My turn.
Come together.
Two options. You either follow my rules or follow my rules. Capiche?
Thank you.
I can do it a different way.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and let me know that you liked it. I'd be curious to know about all of your thoughts on the Bechdel test. You know, should we still be using it? Do you think it was ever useful? Is it just feminist propaganda? Let me know in the comments. I'd be really curious to know what you think. Also, once again, we have a written version of this video essay up on the blog right now. So if you want to go read that, you can head on over there. We've also got heaps of other stuff. We have film reviews, featured filmmakers, the new filmmakers guide, which is a bunch of tips and tricks for people who might just be getting started with filmmaking. So if that's you, make sure you go over there and check it out. www.thewomensdirection.com. Subscribe to this channel if you've been liking what you see, and I will see you in the next video. Alrighty, bye! The second of which happens to be a male cast member. I ran out of breath. The representation of dictates. The Bechdel test was meant as I spoke in tongues. I think when anybody begins to study feminism and Phil, I think when anybody begins to study feminism and why? What is with me and guys' names? It was Ben last week, it's Phil this week.